In this world, humans are at the top of the food chain, but in this story, things are a little different. In Tokyo Ghoul, there are creatures that hunt them as food. These man-eating monsters are called ghouls. Ghouls are creatures designed to take from others. They bring destruction and misery anywhere they go. They are monsters. So how do humans respond when faced with these crazy ghouls? When faced with creatures who physically outclass them in every way? Creatures designed to hunt them? How do they respond when these monsters begin to organize and become a group? Well, they do the same thing they always do. They will use their heads to gain any advantage possible. They will train and grow stronger to close the gap. They will adapt and even the playing field. They will organize and work together, maybe even be a little crazy themselves. And in this video, we're going to find out who's the best at doing exactly that. You see the title, we're going to find out the 10 strongest humans in Tokyo Ghoul. But before we do that, we need to set some ground rules, as the line between humans and ghoul actually blends together. It can be hard to distinguish the difference between one and another, so there are going to be 3 rules of criteria for the video. The first rule is no half ghouls. So artificial or natural one-eyed ghouls such as Ken Kaneki and Eito Yoshimura will not be considered. Although they are half ghouls, which mean they are 50% human, the world of Tokyo Ghoul treats these characters as ghouls. The second rule is no half humans. So characters like Kisho Arima or anyone from the Sunlit Garden will not be considered. Although they have the appearance of a human, they are actually not the same, as half humans are the product of a human and ghoul conception, greatly raising their physical attributes. The third and final rule is no Quinexes. So no Quinexes of any kind. Whether from the CCG or Kano, they won't be considered. Characters like Kuki Orie or anyone from the Ogai group like Hajime Hazuki are excluded from this list. Yes, they are technically human, but they wield ghoul powers like Akagane. They are basically the same as a half ghoul. The only thing separating the two are 5 frames, and we've seen characters actually frame out, so they won't be included. My goal for this video is to look at how normal 100% humans fight in this story. And one last thing before starting the video, we will be using mainly the manga, as that is the original source material. I will bring up the anime if I see it as relevant, but mostly stick to the superior source. So long intro finally out the way, let's begin. The character to start off our list at number 10 is Take Hirako. Take Hirako is a senior investigator who is a character that doesn't really have anything special to him. In fact, he's actually been described as being plain or bland. Basic is a word you can use for Take, and this goes to his Quinke as well. He uses Negomi, which is just a Renkaku sword. It has no special attributes or abilities. It's honestly fitting for him to wield a weapon like this. Take is merely a subordinate of Kisho Arima, and his entire character goal is to fulfill any order of his. Because of this connection to Arima, scaling Take can be very conflicting. In the beginning of RE, we learned that Take was transferred to Squad 0 to be Arima's lieutenant. And Kiramoto, when talking to Heise about it, says, Take is the only person who can keep up with Arima. If you take this at face value, you would assume Take is really just him. But this statement is clearly some bullcrap. When you actually look at this, it should be clear to anyone it's false. Especially when you learn the reason Take is being transferred to Squad 0 is because Kori, the former lieutenant, was promoted to S1 squad leader. How is Take the only person who can keep up with Arima when there was a guy just before him who did the job so well he got promoted? And it's even more dumb when saying only Take can keep up, but not the 3 investigators who are constantly compared to Arima. So you might be thinking, well, why would a character make such a false claim? Well, it came from Kiramoto, who was Take's direct subordinate, and he's drunk in a bar venting to Heise how he can't live up to Take and take over as squad leader. It was merely bias and admiration for someone he works directly for. You can bring up the Shachi vs Squad 0 fight in the anime to back up the statement of Take keeping up with Arima. For those that don't know, Shachi in the anime is a rate triple S ghoul, and when engaged in a fight with Squad 0, he was bodying them pretty bad. Shachi was even pressing Arima, who needed Take to off-guard Shachi to create an opening for Arima to finish the fight. The funny thing is, that is not at all how the fight went down in the manga. First of all, Shachi is a rate double S, not triple S. Although Shachi did clown on Squad 0, Arima handled him alone. Shachi attacked his blind spot like in the anime, but instead of needing Take to save him, Arima read Shachi's attacks and destroyed him. The anime did nothing but add filler, upscaling Take and Shachi. Although something like the Take feat from the anime did happen in the manga, it is under an entirely different context. In a flashback to the days when Uta and Renji were teens, Arima and investigators including Take made a move in the 4th ward where they all fought. Renji, fighting Arima, charged after him where Arima called for Take to jump in and off-guard Renji. This does not prove anything though. Arima was never in danger, and it stated that he was training Take during this fight. He even told Take to move as he is getting in his way. This doesn't even prove Take is on Renji's level, as he off-guarded him, and just before this, base Uta was completely clowning on Take to the point he needed to be saved by Arima, and Uta says himself that he and Renji were equal. Take is a base Renji victim. In fact, Take is consistently getting clowned on by base Uta. In the auction operation, base Uta dodges every single Take attack. Uta even blitzes Take, stabbing him with knives without Take ever noticing. It then hits the knives into his arm again. Take is only able to land a hit on Uta when he's off guard, and it does literally no damage. A Take Glazer could bring up the brief encounter between him and Kuzen, but same with every Take feat, it has some context behind it. Take, in a single panel, was able to mostly dodge Kuzen's attack, although he got clipped, but he did land an attack in a 1v1 encounter. Now, to quickly shut this down, Take was entrusted to create an opening for the main force, because of his experience working with Arima, the same investigator who beat Kuzen when he was 19. And it was due to this experience that Take was able to land a hit, and it did 0 damage, and he still got smacked by holding back Kuzen. Take claims that Arima didn't really teach him anything, so this should come from only his skill, but if we compare this attack to the one we see Arima land against Kuzen, it's practically identical. But Arima was a lot more graceful, fully avoiding the attack. So obviously, Arima's teachings got to him. You might question why this really matters, so think about it like this. Imagine taking a test that you have no chance of passing, but then you're given the answers to the questions. Are you passing because of your intelligence, or because you were given the answers by someone else? Take was given the answers by Arima to pass the test that was Kuzen. This is why the main force looked to Take to create an opening, because he had the answer of how to win from Arima. If that is still not doing it for you, we can just take a look at the next encounter with Kuzen, the Owl Suppression Art, where Take was not chosen to fight Kuzen or even supply any support despite having the answers. Instead, he was entrusted to take down Arimi, and Take, with the support of 3 other investigators, was unable to land an attack on a base Arimi. In fact, although it was a 4v1, Arimi believed she could take down Take and the others without her Kagane, and only used it because she got hit while trying to save an old lady. While this injured Kagane Arimi then dodged all their attacks and was only beaten because they overwhelmed her, and in the final fight, Take got sent flying by a base Koma and would have died there if he wasn't saved by another investigator. To close this long drawn out point, Take is not even close to Arima. I mean, Take says it himself. He hopes he can live up to 1/10 of what Arima was capable of. And who knows if he can even do that, as he isn't even in the rate SS levels. Another way you can try and scale Take is through Squad 0, where he is the squad leader and Arima's lieutenant. But like I said, scaling Take is conflicting. The first question that comes up from this line of scaling is, how strong is Squad 0? There's a statement that says Squad 0 has always seemed unapproachable, and eventually they became an elite squad of a select few. The problem here is their individual strength is known mostly because of only 4 of their members. There's a large gap between the top tiers of the squad and the others, so they aren't relative to one another. We begin to see how unimpressive these lower tier members are when in the later part of RE, while their strength as a team is still commended, they are passed over in important moments, like Kaneki choosing Nishio over Squad 0 to infiltrate the lab, despite the intel advantage Squad 0 provided. They even lose fights, like when 2 of their members took on Hajime and they both lost. You could try and argue Take should be a high tier member due to entrusting him as the squad leader, but we later learned Arima only entrusted him due to their similar emotional states, not his actual strength. There's another way you can scale Squad 0, and that is to V. Take himself tells Kaneki to think of V as a seasoned Squad 0, but just like them, V's individual strength is inconsistent. We see members of V keep up with base Kaneki in speed, where he then questions if they are as fast as Arima in the high tiers of Squad 0. But then 8 chapters later, we see the suit group beat V and every member survived without any critical injuries, even some rate 8 ghouls, so that is even more questionable scaling. Another way a person could possibly argue for Take is his fight with Kaiko, a member of V. In the manga, we learn that Kaiko is the one that trained Arima, and he even questions Yusa when he says that Arima was stronger than him. And in the anime, we actually see Take beat a Kaiko who took the dragon's poison, becoming a ghoul, so he became stronger than his half-human self who claimed to be stronger than Arima. The thing is, this isn't how the fight plays out in the manga. What actually happens is Take is jumping a half-human Kaiko in a 4v1, and Take still gets smacked up and even would have died if Yusa didn't save him. Before Take got clowned on, they had multiple clashes where they appeared to be on even ground, so no one could argue that they are relative to some degree. The thing is though, that Kaiko was kind of playing around with Take. Despite Take creating an opening for his team, Kaiko had the advantage the entire time. He even clashes with Yusa and only begins to overpower Yusa when he brings up the idea of Arima being stronger than him. And the Arima statement is very questionable as well. In part 1 of the series, a younger and arguably stronger Kaiko told Kuzan if they were to fight, he would need a lot more men to take him down, while a 19-year-old Arima no-diffed him. I mean, Yusa literally beat this half-human Kaiko, and he's a low-tier Squad Zero member. In the end, Take doesn't have any real ways to scale him. He is nowhere near the level of the White Reaper. He isn't even a top 5 Squad Zero member. In fact, he could very well be the weakest link. So after spending this entire time debunking any chain of scaling for this character, how strong exactly is he? Well, it's really hard to tell. He's carried by his connection to other investigators throughout the whole entire series, and what's crazy is we never see Take win a single fight. In fact, the only confirmed win he has is an off-camera fight from some nameless Rate S Ukaku Ghoul. So Take is a low Rate S level, and is only here due to narrative implications that puts him above the other human investigators that didn't make the list. Number 9 on this list is a character who takes a similar role as Take throughout the story, and that is Hanabeh Abara. Abara is a rank 2 investigator who serves in the S3 Suzuya squad. He is Juzo's right-hand man, and just like Take, his whole character purpose is to fulfill Juzo's orders. But unlike Take, he is a lot more interesting. Whether it's his personality, design, or impact on the story, he has more to talk about, and this goes into his Quinquet as well. He wields Mr. Silver Skull, a Quinquet that is the shape of a basic sword, but unlike Take's Negomi, it has more to it, and he showcases this ability in his fight with Misa, a Rate S Ghoul. Abara and Misa have a very close encounter. Misa is able to evade every attack of his, while Abara is able to block all of her Kagane attacks. They are fighting on equal grounds until Misa finds an opening and kicks his Quinquet into a wall, forcing it to be stuck. Abara, put in this life-threatening situation, is forced to showcase Mr. Silver Skull's true power, where it is able to create a ribcage like Kagane through a surface and blocks Misa's triple blade Kagane in one-shotting her. But just like Take, there's a chain of scaling some people use to upscale Abara through Juzo. During Operation Goat Sweep, the purpose of it was to take down Kaneki, and Juzo and Abara were the 2 investigators entrusted with completing this task. And when in front of Kaneki, Abara showed gear that only a small amount of investigators have, and that is the Arata 2 armor. And One-Eyed King Kaneki in response brings out his Centipede F Kakuja, and he lost to the 2 investigators. Now some people like to use this to scale Arata 2 Abara to One-Eyed King Kaneki, but just like Take and his feats, it has a lot of context to go over. The fight happened off screen. We literally never see a single engagement from this fight, only the beginning and end. We do get some hints as to what happened during the fight, and one of those is Abara took a hit during the altercation and was critically injured. Most of what comes from this are statements from characters that are used but not truly understood. We see Furata credit the Suzuya squad for defeating Kaneki, and later in Kaneki's mind he says that going against 2 Arata users is tough. I'll explain these at a later time, as I believe how much Abara actually contributed to the fight is overrated, but the major thing I want to talk about is when the Council of Kanekis were questioning why they actually lost the fight. One of them says Abara. Another agrees to this, while another Kaneki says Abara provided good support. I want to talk about this here, as it has been used to put Abara on a level he has no place of being in. My first question is, how exactly do you scale support? Is Abara stronger than Eito because of this support? What about Kuzan? Could he have completed the owl suppression operation alone? Maybe he can beat Uta and Renji. If you answered yes to any of those, I want you to explain to me how Takeyomi is Noro level. He also provided good support for the Qs, even cutting off his Kagane and saving Psycho. If you also believe he scales to Noro, then why is Takeyomi getting mixed by Shu? What I'm getting at here is the characters that offer support in fights can easily be upscaled way beyond their true abilities. And what exactly is good support? Because if we use what we saw prior to their fight, Abara doesn't exactly do much when helping Juzo. Before Kaneki arrived, Juzo was taking on Toka and Hinami, with Abara supporting him. Juzo tells Abara to be ready and has him sit on the sidelines waiting until he has an opportunity created by Juzo to jump in and help. And Juzo does this, hurting Toka in the air, forcing her to fall, and Abara uses this opening to attack her. But this injured, pregnant, hungry Toka who has been eating human food blocks the attack with her arm, and Abara says, not deep enough. She then proceeds to dodge a barrage of his attacks. Abara then sits on the sidelines again watching Juzo fight, where Abara, using Mr. Silver Skull, blocks Hinami's Kagane and creates an opening for Juzo. Is this what it was like during the fight with Kaneki? Is that how he got hit? He sat on the sideline due to not being able to keep up or land a hit and used Mr. Silver Skull to create an opening for Juzo to finish the fight, but Kaneki broke it, resulting in him getting bodied? Juzo did say how in response to Abara telling him he got hit. Why would Abara need to explain that he got hit if he was actually involved in the fight with Juzo? Why would Juzo ask how if Abara was fighting right next to him the whole time? It doesn't make much sense if Abara was really involved in the fight. I mean, Juzo does tell him to be ready again just like he did prior to fighting Toka and Hinami. And Abara being the reason Kaneki lost is funny when considering the fact that he was actually the last thought the Kaneki Council had in regards to reasons for losing. They blamed Toru for discovering their hideout before ever actually considering Abara. Ultimately, there's not really any evidence to support the idea of Abara being any higher on the list. Way too many questions unanswered. Did Abara activate his errata, or was it used for purely defense, similar to how Shinohara and Iwa used theirs? How did the fight really go? Kaneki is known for glazing the series. Is he glazing here? And if errata really was so effective, where was it during the final fight? He could have helped fight the owl instead of begging Juzo to do it. Or he could have used it to protect the Suzuya squad from Eito's RC blast instead of almost dying and needing to be saved by the Qs. What about when Ghoul Kaiko soloed his whole squad and almost killed them? I think that would have been a good time to use it. The errata 2 is an auto-equipping armor, so he doesn't have to prepare to use it. One could argue he's still injured from the fight with Kaneki, but he and his whole team almost died. Why wouldn't he have used it there? And that's really it for Abara's scaling. He used an errata 2 armor once off camera and never used it again, so I would put him on the level of Misa as they had a high diff fight, and Abara even said Misa almost killed him. And for reference, Misa was stated multiple times to have been at odds with the Bin brothers. She doesn't really have any sort of scaling, so she should at least be relative to the two. One of the Bin brothers was equal to an early part 1 Kaneki, while both brothers lost to an 11th Ward Operation Amon. Now to explain why Abara is above Take. These two are reflections of one another, essentially two characters fulfilling the same role, and I believe we were robbed of seeing some sort of fight between these two. It should have taken place during the Operation Gold Sweep arc, where the main Suzuya squad members take on what's left of Squad Zero. I think this would have been a cool fight to see, as they say in the same arc that the Suzuya squad had grown so much it could be called an expanded Squad Zero. They are relative to some degree. Although it does say that individually the Suzuya squad is inferior, it doesn't really prove anything. Just like how there's levels to the strength of Squad Zero, there are levels to the Suzuya squad. Juzo recruited a ton of unnamed investigators that have no feats at all, so obviously the average level of strength of their squad would be weaker. We see Arima is considered to be a part of Squad Zero, so Juzo should also be a member of the Suzuya squad. Does this mean that Juzo is inferior to the bottom tiers of Squad Zero? The obvious answer is no. And just like Take, Abara is commended for his skill throughout the series. For example, when engaged when they raid SS Ghoul Corona, Abara is able to block and dodge Corona's Kagane attacks. He is even able to cut it off at times. Corona then complements his defenses and reflexes. Abara should be relative to Take, but because Abara has actual feats and shows why he is skilled instead of getting clowned and complimented, he should be stronger. But what really seals it is that Abara just has better utility. Mr. Silver Skull is shown to be a strong defensive and offensive tool. And to add to it, the errata 2 he has is a defense that Take can't overcome. Take has never shown to be able to do real damage to a full Kakuja, so Abara is stronger. And please don't use their investigator ranks to argue Take over Abara. Ranks do not indicate strength level. If you try and do this, I need you to explain to me how rank 2 Sato is stronger than rank 3 Juzo and rank 3 Arima, despite the fact that Juzo was taking over Sato in the 11th Ward operation, and Arima was doing undercover operations alone. Now, moving on to number 8 on the list is Akira Mado. Akira is an assistant special investigator and the daughter of the first major human antagonist, who died at the hands of the rabbit. And ever since, all of her father's goals, expectations, and specifically Quinkeis were entrusted to her. She has a good amount of Quinkeis throughout the series, but each Quinkei symbolizes the level she is at. The first Quinkei she showcased was her at a very embarrassing low point. When engaged in a fight with Naki in part 1, she was wielding a Chimera Quinkei, a fusion of 2 different Kaganes to form one Quinkei. In this case, she was wielding the Bikaku Kokaku fusion Amatsu. She first shows us it by off-guarding Naki, grabbing him and throwing him to herself, where she landed a hit right through his chest, not doing any real damage. Naki screams that his chest hurts, but the next time we see him, he's completely fine. Akira, while on the retreat, begins to show us some utility, throwing a CRC gas grenade into the crowd of ghouls to nerf their RC cells and dissolve their Kagane. Akira then begins to target Naki, landing a barrage of hits on him. The embarrassing part is that weakened base Naki walks through her attacks and kicks her down, and bites her leg. And that was the level she was at in part 1. But in RE, she levels up, beginning to use her father's infamous Renkaku Quinkei Fuguchi. It is a long-range, high-speed Quinkei which has been described to have the appearance of a spine. She first showcases it by taking out a group of white suits in quick succession, before challenging Naki to a rematch. And this time around, she wasn't going to get disrespected. Due to the range and speed of Fuguchi, Naki couldn't get close to her. He tried closing the distance when her Quinkei was fully stretched out, but what he didn't know is that her Quinkei bounces around, coming right around and stabbing him in the back, severely wounding him to the point of needing to be saved from Q bullets. If Naki wasn't helped, that would have been the end for him. So the question is, how strong is Naki? Well, Naki is a Raid S Ghoul and the leader of the White Suits. replacing Yamori. But believe it or not, Naki is actually stronger than his big bro. Kaneki, during the 11th Ward operation, completely bullied Yamori, leaving him on death's door. Kaneki, after training and cannibalizing for 6 months after his fight with Yamori, couldn't beat the Ghoul twins, even calling their teamwork a problem. And Shu, after training with Kaneki, is able to clown on the twin ghouls. They even call him strong, not something they said about Kaneki after fighting him. And Shu, a chapter later, then clashes with Naki multiple times. Shu even believes the only way to defeat Naki is working together and stabbing him in the back when he gets exhausted. Some people would try and debunk this by using the fight between Kaneki and Naki in RE as evidence, where we learn whoever's the strongest of the white suits is the leader. But the problem with this is Naki was in Coach Leia for the majority of Yamori's reign, so obviously he wouldn't be able to lead them. You could bring up how Kaneki says Naki doesn't hold a candle to Yamori, and Naki agrees, but that is merely Kaneki just talking trash to rile him up. Shu says nice in response to Kaneki's words, and we see that Kaneki holds Yamori on a pedestal as he sees him as a symbol of power. Kaneki is a glazer. He does this multiple times throughout the series, and Naki sees Yamori as his big bro. Obviously, he's going to have a lot of admiration for him. This isn't a solid debunk, as we learned 7 chapters later, Kaneki felt that his life was in danger when fighting the twins. How can Naki be weaker than Yamori when Shu, a ghoul he was equal to at the time, clowned on the twins? The same ghouls he couldn't beat 6 months after getting stronger post-Yamori fight. Put Akira in the room with Yamori and Kaneki, and she's walking out with 2 new Quinkeis. Let her go to the restaurant, and she's doing them worse than Juzo did. So now, to explain if it wasn't obvious already how Akira beats Abara. Well, Akira no-diffed Misa right after fighting Naki, the same ghoul Abara almost died to. And if you're wondering how she will handle this Arata 2 armor, well, she has the advantage. She has the superior defense, as with her second Fuguchi Quinke, she was able to block the force of Tatara's amped Kakuja flames. And if you want to use the anime, she was able to block Eito's RC blast. And she is more skilled offensively and should have no problem doing damage to him, as her Quinke is a Renkaku, which has the advantage over Kokakus like his Arata. And even if she can't penetrate the armor, that is not an issue. As we learn, Kagane, specifically Renkakus, can slip through the cracks of an Arata armor. And Akira, who has practiced for a year with the Spine Fuguchi to the point she can control it like the tip of her finger, should have no problem navigating it around the armor, as she has showcased better feats and is more skilled. And his head is literally exposed in the armor. When in doubt, she could just attack that. And now, moving on to the 7th spot, we have Kousuke Hoji. Hoji is a special investigator who, like Akira, has a connection to Mr. Mado. He was Mado's subordinate when he first became an investigator, where he learned many techniques from investigating to combat skills, and one thing he really learned is Quinke techniques. Mado has been praised throughout the series as an expert Quinke user, and this knowledge has been passed down to Hoji. It's even stated that after years of training, Hoji surpassed Mado and has become a master Quinke user, and he showcases his skill with the multiple Quinkes he uses. During the Owl Suppression operation, Hoji was selected to be a part of the main force to take down Kuzan, wielding the Ukaku Quinke Hollow, which gives Hoji a single gauntlet that shoots out RC projectiles that explode on contact. And I'm going to be honest with you, Hoji is a fraud, as during this fight there is absolutely zero argument for him to have any relative scaling to Kuzan. During this fight it was a 3v1 and Hoji was sitting back and zoning the entire time as 2 other investigators were actively engaged with him. And with Hoji sitting back raining down free shots with the knowledge of where Kuzan's weak points are, it is said that they still lack the firepower to take down Kuzan. Then Hoji randomly disappears during their fight after backup arrives to pick up his prized possession, the Quinke that he relies on to finish the job. His rate SS, Chishe, is a Kokaku with a massive blade that has been described by other investigators to be really heavy. To his credit though, he was called the main event and was trusted to deliver the final blow to Kuzan with this Quinke, where he does indeed finish the job. As this implied, Hoji has the highest damage output with his rate SS Quinke out of the 5 investigators fighting Kuzan, but Kuzan was severely weakened and fatigued as he has been getting jumped for multiple chapters. Kuzan was literally missing an arm before Hoji got there, so there's no real argument that it would have one-tapped a healthy Kuzan or done any real damage. And if you want to know something funny, in the anime, Hoji wasn't the one to put Kuzan down, it was Shinohara. Just food for thought, as we will come back later to show how even the anime believes Hoji is a fraud. Hoji has been described as a skillful Quinke user, but his strongest Quinke he has never actually shown in a full fight. He has only ever used it as a finishing move, so how skilled he truly is begins to come into question. Eito arrives right after Kuzan is beaten, and Hoji is one of the 2 investigators who noticed her, but he fails to dodge her attack and gets one-tapped. Then his fellow investigator picks up Hoji's rate SS Quinke and uses it better than he did. And what makes Hoji look worse is that multiple sorry rank 2 investigators were able to dodge Eito's attack, but Hoji can't. Determining where Hoji scales can be tricky, and it's not because he gets clowned on, but mostly because there's a lack of real feats. Hoji is only involved in 3 fights in the entire series, and those 3 fights have a lot of context with it. We already spoke of one, so let's speak of the other 2. During the Rashima operation, we see Hoji's claim to fame. He takes on Tatara in his Kakuja form, and Hoji proceeds to no-diff Tatara, wielding his rate A+ Quinke Litsu, a pair of Kokaku blades that he dual wields. The fight was short, but Hoji dodges every single attack from Tatara. He lands one attack, but it does no real damage, and then he stabs his arms, trapping them, leaving an opening for Hoji to quote-unquote finish the job. Well, the first thing to go over, there's absolutely zero evidence Hoji would have essentially one-tapped Tatara. Hoji landed 2 attacks prior, but they did no damage. He didn't even draw blood, so it's hard to tell if he could have. The next thing is, Tatara was at a severe disadvantage in this fight. One could say that Tatara was actually buffed due to his flames being amped by his hatred for Hoji, but that same hatred was actually mentally nerfing him. Hoji said this himself. Tatara's intense emotions clouded his judgment and caused him to take big and wild swings that had no chance of connecting. And on top of that mental nerf, Hoji had 2.5 years of experience fighting basically a Tatara clone and his twin brother. Hoji says that Tatara has the same Kakuja as his brother did, and during the fight he says Tatara has a weakness if he is like his brother, and proceeds to say Tatara takes big swings just like his brother did. And if that's not enough evidence for you, Kaneki, in preparation for the Rashima operation, asked Hoji to share advice with the other special investigators on how to deal with Tatara. And if you want to use the anime, Hoji was getting bullied in that fight until Takizawa appeared and saved him. They even had an anime-only fight. It happened off screen, but from the end of it, it appears Tatara, who wasn't even in his Kakuja form, had the advantage. What I'm saying is we can't use that fight to scale Hoji, and Tatara's strength is very questionable, but that is a whole other rabbit hole itself. The last thing that is used to overhype Hoji is the statement from Takizawa, where he says, Hoji couldn't go through with killing me. I knew Investigator Hoji would never lose to me. This is pure glaze. First of all, we only see a couple of panels from this fight and it appears that Hoji was at a disadvantage. So to take this at face value and say Hoji could have killed Takizawa is cap. Did he even have the opportunity to do so? And to say Hoji would never lose to Takizawa is hilarious. Are we going to say Hoji could beat the Owl Amon that Takizawa took down? Even though a one-eyed King Kaneki couldn't pierce his Kakuja? And Hoji couldn't damage Kuzen's weak points? Let's be serious. Yes, Hoji was under emotional distress fighting his former subordinate, but Takizawa was also holding back, as he wasn't in his owl form that he just used to beat Tatara. And what's crazy is that Hoji is the one who initiated the confrontation. Takizawa wasn't hostile at all, he even tried talking to him. But according to Akira's own words, Hoji was trying to do an act of compassion for Takizawa, putting him down himself instead of having Takizawa eradicated. If Hoji knew he couldn't go through with taking him out, why would he sacrifice his whole squad's life then, for something that didn't even need to happen? So you might ask, why would Takizawa say something like that then? Because it's pure admiration for his former superior. We have seen multiple occurrences in this video alone of characters glazing others they have high respect for. It's a normal human thing. Kobe Bryant is my favorite basketball player, and I'm gonna say he's the best basketball player of all time. Does that automatically make it true? No, it doesn't. So, how do we exactly scale Hoji? That's the tricky part. We can say he's above Akira for sure, as during the Hiroshima operation he was her team leader. We could say Hoji is in the rate SS tier for taking down Tatara's brother, but that was an off-camera fight and there's a lot of context surrounding that as well. There's only one way to scale Hoji. In part 1, Ayato blitzed a pair of investigators. Akira then directly compares one of the investigators to Hoji. Now this Ayato isn't the same one who lost to Kaneki. This Ayato was actually training with Sachi at the time, but still he wasn't at the level he was in RE yet. So Hoji is barely in the rate SS tier. Now the investigator who is just outside the top 5 in the 6th spot is Mougan Tanakamaru. Mougan is a special investigator and in position as S1 squad leader. Mougan's success specifically in combat is in great thanks to his powerful Quinke. In fact, investigators believe Mougan has one of the strongest Quinkes in the entire series. When faced with Noro and Igiri Ghoul with insane regenerative ability, investigators say he is a rate greater than or equal to SS Ghoul, but that might not be accurate, it could be higher. They even say aside from the Owl and Shachi, Noro is in a class of his own, and when faced with this Ghoul, investigators say if only we had a high damage output Quinke like investigator Arima's Naru Kami or Mugen's higher mind. Not only does this imply Mougan could put down Noro, at least with the support of Kuramoto and the Q squad, but Mougan has one of the 2 strongest Quinkes in terms of damage output in the entire series, and he has shown the capability of this Quinque multiple times. During the Owl Suppression operation, Mougan was entrusted to take down Koma, a rate SS Ghoul. This is where he first showcases his Ukaku Quinque Higher Mind, aka Angel Beat, releasing a long-range AoE blast taking out many ghouls. This ability made it difficult for Koma to close in on him, as one hit would take him out. Eventually, Koma was able to close the distance, cutting off Mugen's fuel tank, but Mougan had more tricks up his sleeve, showing his close-range combat mode and one-tapping Koma. And this is how most of Mugen's fights turn out. During the Coach Leia invasion, Mougan was able to block a base Renji attack, and when Renji wasn't paying attention, he one-tapped him as well with his close combat mode, focusing a large energy blast into one attack. During the Dragon War arc, Ato's corpse appeared on the battlefield, and Mougan was placed in charge of the fire teams to wear her down. Mougan landed many barrages of shots, weakening her Kakuja. In the anime, Mougan even has a better feat from this, as he was entrusted to finish off Ato. He landed a large energy blast, cooking her after Juzo set him up for the attack. She would have been done if she wasn't a walking corpse who didn't feel pain. The anime consistently shows how powerful his Quinque is. During the Kuzan fight in a 5v1, Shinohara says if they had one more investigator, they could clinch the fight, and he asked specifically for Mougan. Back to the manga, it's not just his offense that's impressive, but also his defense. After Take's sorry self gets folded by base Koma, Mougan steps in to save him, blocking both Koma and Arimi's Kagane attacks. Now, to explain why Mougan is stronger than Hoji, one could argue that Hoji is stronger due to being assigned to the main force that took down Kuzan. But the problem with that is Hoji actually had the worst performance out of every investigator involved. He even performed worse than the backup that arrived, even though he was selected above them. So using that to scale him doesn't work, because then we would have to put him above Juzo and Kori, even though they performed better than him. Besides the fact that Mougan actually has feats to go over, one of the things Hoji is admired for is the damage output of his rate SS Quinque. Mougan's Higher Mind outscales Hoji's Chishe, and for an actual feat to chain the two, Hoji was compared to an investigator who got blitzed by Part 1 Ayato. Mougan, during the Coach Leia invasion, actually blocks a rate SS Ayato's attack and then overpowers him by pushing him back. Ayato even says, if I can't engage him up close or from a distance, I will try to loosen him up from mid-range, implying that Mougan, to some degree, is relative to Ayato, something Hoji isn't. Mougan is an investigator who's in the lower rate SS levels, but due to his high power Quinque, with the right support, Mougan can compete at a far higher level. Now, the investigator who begins our top 5 is Kori Ui. Kori is a very skilled investigator, becoming one of the elite special investigators at a very young age, and has worked very closely with Kisho Arima. In fact, he was Arima's former Squad 0 lieutenant before being promoted to S1 squad leader, and later being promoted to the CCG Deputy Bureau Chief. Kori is one of the high tiers in Squad 0, wielding a long-range Kokaku Quinque called Kotaro Amon, which creates a momentary flexible blade. When engaged in a fight with the lower tiers of Squad 0, we learn that Kotaro Amon is a ranged weapon, but it actually gets more lethal the closer you are to it. Take even warns all of Squad 0 to watch their movements, as Kotaro Amon is such a fast Quinque they could easily lose their toes. And since we are already on this topic, no, we cannot use the Kori vs Squad 0 fight to upscale Take. Yes, Kori warns Hajime of Squad 0, saying that they are not to be taken lightly, but he isn't warning them of anyone specifically, but as a team. And the fight itself contains an extreme amount of context. First of all, Kori was mentally broken during this fight over the death of Haru and Arima. The only reason he was able to keep going was the false promise from Furata to revive them. He literally says after the fight that he's sinking, and now that they can't come back, he can't get up anymore. And the fight was a 2v1 with Take giving Yusa intel on how to deal with Kori. And then after the fight, we even learned that both sides were holding back and under emotional distress, not wanting to fight each other. They are all former teammates, and Take is a person who Kori specifically refers to as someone close to him when having a breakdown over everything happening to him. And if you choose to use the anime, Take and Kori were fighting off screen, and it appears that Take is actually losing the encounter. It should be very clear that Take and the rest of Squad 0 are weaker than him. During the final fight against V, Kori tells Take and Squad 0 to follow his lead. But similar to Take, due to this connection to Arima, Kori can be upscaled to a higher degree than he really belongs. And the way this is done is through his 2 interactions with the One-Eyed Owl. Ato appears after Kuzan's defeat, knocking out a group of special investigators. Although they were off guard except Hoji's trash self, who's looking directly at her, Kori is the only one to dodge her attack. Kori then proceeds to dodge multiple barrages from Ato. This feat is impressive, though random rank 2 investigators were also able to perform this, but to consistently dodge Ato's attacks in a 1v1 is still nothing to scoff at. The issue I am speaking of though comes from his offensive performance. Kori, using Kotaro Amon, lands an attack on Eito, but it does bounce off her Kakuja, doing 0 damage. She then breaks his Quinke, and using Hoji's Chishe is able to land multiple attacks, although they also do no real damage. Kori lacks the physical strength to do damage to a rate SSS Ghoul, but the argument comes about with his speed. At first glance, it appears Kori's fast enough to keep up with the rate SSS Ghoul, which would upscale him to insane degrees, but in reality, Kori is not that fast. Yes, his attacks are fast on a general scale, I don't mean to take that from him, we already seen lower tier characters stress over his speed, but he is nowhere near Eito's speed. Eito is an Ukaku Ghoul, which are ghouls known for their speed, and Eito is one of the strongest Ukaku ghouls, which makes her one of the fastest ghouls in general. But due to her confidence, it can make her appear slower than she really is. Eito is letting Kori hit her due to her confidence and her durability from her Kakuja. She was so confident that Kori lacked the firepower to damage her that she literally sat there and took his hits. We see this in the same fight as she lets random rank 2 investigators hit her, but right when Arima appears and they begin to fight, she starts to dodge attacks. This is even more clear in the anime where she dodges multiple attacks from Arima. Eito is the same ghoul who kept up with Black Reaper Kaneki in speed. The same ghoul who ran through V and kept up with Farada in speed. The same ghoul who just fought Kori and was able to evade and run away from Arima. It doesn't make sense to say Kori's faster than these characters. Are we going to say rank 2 Ayumi and Kiramoto are faster than Arima? Although Ayumi got body slammed by Torso and Kiramoto just before fighting Eito couldn't hit base Arimi with help, and Arimi is a slower Ukaku ghoul than Eito. Let's be serious here. A one-legged Juzo was able to land an attack on Eito. Are we going to say this one-legged Juzo is faster than Arima? And what's crazy is that this one-legged Juzo is able to draw blood from Eito, something Kori couldn't do. It should be quite clear that Kori doesn't scale to Eito. Kori even knew he had no chance of winning and his sole plan was to stall for Arima. Then a chapter later, Kori was forced to block an attack from Eito and was knocked out from the force of it. I mean, in RE, we see Kori in complete shock that Kaneki was able to beat the owl alone. But there's also a second fight to go over. In the final fight with V, Eito arrives in the middle of the battlefield. And to just get this out of the way, Kori saying he doesn't know if he can beat Eito without Hoji does not upscale Hoji at all. Same with Kori calling for Take to come help. Kori was panicking and calling for help. He literally says he is a scaredy cat in the same chapter. It's a part of his character. He made a simple panic statement, calling for not only Hoji but the entire main force that fought Kuzan, and then screaming for Take because Take is Kori's mentor. It's quite obvious Kori was panicking as he seems to forget that he has the help of the Qs, who know how to beat Eito due to Kaneki in this fight, but also that they have an investigator who can take Eito out alone with the support of many other ghouls as well. Kori, yet again, is able to dodge Eito's attacks, dodging her large Kagane blast and her direct attacks, which is impressive. But this time, Kori is able to land multiple attacks, even piercing her Kakuja. He repeats this and is able to stab Eito's body once her Kakuja was torn open. So now, at the end of the series, it appears that Kori can actually 1v1 Eito and do damage to her. Well, no. It should still be clear that Kori cannot hang with Eito, as when she appears, he begins to completely panic, even calling for other investigators who can't compete either. Take tells Kori that nobody here has more experience in the owl battle than him, and this sole reason is why Kori is placed in charge of the owl fight, not because they believe he can take her out, but because of his experience fighting her. He, above anyone else, has the answers on how to fight her. Kori, in response, says, "You say that as if it's easy. Don't you know I'm a scaredy cat? I mean, I don't know how much more obvious it has to get." Kori then orders countless investigators for help, Mougan to offer fire support and asks Juzo to finish her off for him, and Kori had to find the resolve to stand up against her, questioning if he can beat her. Then Mougan and the fire team land a barrage of shots wearing down her Kakuja. You know, Mougan, the investigator with one of the most powerful Quinkes in the series, landing countless shots on Eito after Kori gives them knowledge of her weak points. And right before Kori engages with her, Urie and Toru tell him her vulnerabilities and where he should aim his attacks. What I'm saying is Kori was only able to damage Eito because a fire team of investigators landed a barrage of shots on her weak points, wearing her down. And then Kori was given direct advice of how to hurt her. And to top that all off, not only was this Eito wore down from this, but she's overall weaker than before. Eito's Kakuja looks far different than when she was actually alive, and she is a corpse being controlled by a weaker rate SS ghoul. This is not Eito at her full power. Some people believe that this Eito is actually a Quinke, which is stated to fully utilize the ghoul's natural abilities. Those Quinkes are self-sustaining. This Eito isn't. She is being directly controlled by the priest ghoul. This is shown clearly by not only her appearance, but after the priest ghoul is injured, Toru says Eito's power is fading. She is directly depending on him. The two just operate differently. While Koma and Arimi go and do their own thing, Eito is being used as merely a tank to buy time for Furata. They clearly state this themselves. So no, Kori isn't as fast as Eito either for landing attacks. This Eito is a puppet who can't be slowed down by damage. So why would Donato be worried about her dodging attacks? He literally has their sit there in tank damage. This is clear when after Eito is severely injured, she keeps attacking. Kori panics and says, "We are dead," then lands an attack on the main body and says, "Damaging the main body did nothing. If a puppet can't be hurt, why move them at all?" What I'm trying to say is that Kori isn't on a rate triple S level. He isn't fast enough or strong enough to do damage to the one-eyed owl, and can't really compete at all besides being able to dodge some attacks. But to give him some credit, during the fight with Kuzan, Kori was sent as backup to offer firepower for the main force, and after constant jumping, Kori was actually the first investigator to do real damage to Kuzan. Although Kori can't compete with rate triple S ghouls alone, with the right support, he can actually have an impact. Which now just leaves the question: how strong is Kori? Well, it's hard to tell, not because like Taki gets bullied in every fight he's in, but because of a lack of opportunities. Kori either fights Eito, a ghoul most characters don't scale to, or is mentally nerfed over his personal losses. During the Mishima operation, Kori and his squad are entrusted to take out the final 2% of ghouls on the island. Kori then comes into contact with Shu, and this fatigued and mentally nerfed Kori, who's affected by the death of his subordinate Hiru, is able to dodge and block Shu's Kagane attacks. Even while getting jumped by other ghouls like Naki, Kori is able to efficiently defend himself from Shu. They then proceed to clash with each other. It got to the point Shu didn't even think he can win against Kori and asked to switch out with another ghoul. So this fatigued and mentally nerfed Kori, who should be even more nerfed as he is clearly affected fighting Shu, the ghoul whose family operation caused Hiru her life, could evade all damage from Shu, and he retreated because he didn't think he could win. And this Shu is at his absolute peak during the series, as in the beginning of RE, Shu was cannibalizing to the point his father thought if Shu's bloodline allowed him to, he would have become a Kakuja. The same Shu then is able to press a stable Heise in a fight, so Kori at his peak would destroy a stable Heise, an emphasis on stable because Heise's strength fluctuates based on his mental state. So the question is, how is Kori stronger than Mugen? One could argue Mugen is stronger because Kori was overpowered by a base Arimi, and Mugen saved Kori and Take by blocking Arimi and Koma's Kaganes. But this doesn't work as Kori was actually off guard. Kaiko began to wield Kuzan's Quinke, and after swinging it, Kori was worried if Eito was active again. We already saw how it would end up if Kori fought a base Arimi. The same fatigued and mentally distraught Kori that just fought Shu is able to dodge and block multiple barrages from Arimi, even while Kori is getting jumped by white suits. Mugen has better one-on-one feats than Kori, but like I said, it's because of a lack of opportunities. Although Kori dodging attacks from Eito is something that Mugen hasn't shown to be capable of. But Kori, at his peak, has statements that show his superiority to Mugen. Not only was Kori selected as backup for the main force to fight Kuzan over Mugen, but Kori is stated to be a promising young investigator, considered second only to Kisho Arima in terms of talent. And Kori was actually in the race to replace Arima and become the next Reaper, which would put Kori above every other active investigator that wasn't in the race, which includes Mugen. And this broken Reaper, you can call him, is praised for his strength by others. Dr. Shiba, when speaking to Urie about elite investigators, says young investigators who go on to become special investigators fight a Kakuja at some point in time, and even mentions the broken Reaper's name, Kori Ui, Juzo Suzuya, and Kisho Arima. And to clarify, as some people could use this as a debunk, after the Rishima operation ended, Kori was upset over failing to kill the last 2%. Specifically Shu in avenging Hiru. Ura comforts him, saying the 20th Ward Ghost interfered, but he then scoffs at the idea of Kori being a quote-unquote ultimate investigator. This could be used to debunk all of Kori's statements, but it doesn't work, as the Kori that fought here was fatigued and mentally nerfed over Hiru and fighting Shu. And even then, although Fura made an excuse, it was still true. Naki saved Misa, and then Shu saved Naki, then Shu was saved by Arimi, then Arimi was saved by Koma. If there wasn't any interference, Kori would have easily handled them all. The Broken Reaper, Kori Ui, is an elite investigator that never really got to show his absolute peak in a 1v1, but is solidly in the rate SS level. And moving deeper into the top 5, the character who is at number 4 is Kotaro Amon. Now, when speaking of Amon, I'm not talking about his transformation into a ghoul. Although that is him at his peak of strength, I'm actually talking about his time as a human investigator. Kotaro Amon is a character who has been connected to Kaneki in all stages of the series, especially in part 1 where it seems like they interact with each other in every arc. In the beginning, before Kaneki accepted who he was, Kotaro Amon was a rank 1 investigator, and their first fight happens all the way in chapter 24 of part 1. Kaneki, who was far weaker at the time, tried to lay out Amon with a punch, but this is where we see Amon's shining attribute, and that is his strength, fully tanking the punch and slamming a base Kaneki to the floor. Amon was so physically superior at the time that he even believed Kaneki was a human pretending to be a ghoul. Kaneki then realizes that Amon is no average investigator, and that he can't afford to hold back, releasing his Kakugan. Amon, in response to seeing his opponent as a ghoul, showcases his first Quinke in the series, a kokaku called Dojima. Dojima is just a large club, but because of Amon's physical capabilities, he can wield the kokaku dangerously. We see this as he easily overpowers Kaneki, slamming him to the floor. But after Kaneki bites Amon and releases Rize power, he's able to completely break Amon's Dojima. After losing his Quinke to Kaneki, he begins wielding a Quinke called Kira. Engaged in a fight with the two Bin brothers, he is able to block both of them, one of their Kagane with Kira, while blocking the other with his armor. Kira is a Kokaku Quinke given to him from his fallen mentor, Mado. It is the shape that mimics a sword and is extremely heavy. In fact, stated in the Volume 2 light novel, even among other Kokaku, it is the heaviest of the heavyweight. And although it's the heaviest Quinke in the series, its weight is able to maximize Amon's power. We see this when Amon showcases Kira's true power, the ability to change shape, splitting into two swords and taking out both Bin brothers at once. Kaneki and Amon have one last interaction before Amon is no longer fully human. Kaneki, after being rated a SS ghoul, and Amon earning the rank of a senior investigator, meet again during the owl suppression operation. Kaneki, on the way to save Yoshimura, is stopped by Amon in chapter 133 of part 1. Kaneki tries to run past Amon, wanting to avoid any conflict, but Amon won't let him, splitting Kura into two and throwing the other half, stopping Kaneki. And here we see Kura's other ability, the ability to absorb its other half. Although Kira is the heaviest Quinke, it has the potential to be used at range because of this. But we never really see Amon do that. Regardless, Kaneki accepts this challenge and they fight. And well, Amon loses pretty easily. Amon in base is not really that impressive. In fact, if we were to make this list just of his base form, he'd be a lot lower. But thanks to Dr. Chigio, he gives Amon a new weapon, an auto-equipping prototype of the Arata 2, and his strongest Quinke, the modified Dojima. Dr. Chigio states that because of Amon's physical capabilities, he can draw out Arata's full power. Amon showcases this, activating the armor and blitzing Eye Patch Kaneki, injuring him and forcing Kaneki to transform into his centipede state. The modified Dojima has the appearance of a lance and actually possesses the Bin brothers' Kagane to amplify the damage. We see this when Arata to Amon and Centipede Kaneki clash. Amon loses his arm while Kaneki is severely wounded. Some people believe Amon lost this fight, but that isn't the case. It was more of a tie. Although Amon did lose his arm, Kaneki was so severely wounded that he couldn't heal. And because the damage was so much, Kaneki couldn't even walk, but instead crawled across the floor. Kaneki even began to lose his mind. That's why he ate Hide. It was to heal. One could argue that Kaneki was holding back, but so was Amon. Amon even says to himself, hoping that Kaneki doesn't die. Arata to Amon is equal to part 1 Kaneki's first centipede form. And fun fact, because some people believe they just clashed once and that was the end of the fight, but they actually clashed multiple times off camera. The environment from the beginning and the end of the fight is different, and investigators even say they lost sight of them. The anime shows this, although it is different as both Amon and Kaneki don't transform into their higher states of power. Now, you might be wondering, how is Amon stronger than the Broken Reaper? How can Amon be stronger than an investigator who is compared to Arima? Well, most of the statements regarding Kori's strength happen after Amon is no longer an investigator, especially the statement saying Kori is in the race to be the next Reaper. That would put him above active investigators, but Amon was supposedly killed by Tatara. This excludes him from everything. You could try and use the fact that Kori was selected over Amon to fight Kuzen, but that was before Amon received his Arata 2. It was a complete surprise to everyone. Dr. Chigio literally pulled up on an ATV after his fight with Kaneki. You could bring up how Kori has to be stronger because he is a special investigator, while Amon was only a senior rank, but I already explained how ranks don't determine strength. But I can give an even better example. Kaneki beat the One-Eyed Owl alone. A feat Kori was in complete shock of, but yet Kaneki was only promoted to an assistant special investigator. Does that make Black Reaper Kaneki weaker than Kori, despite him performing a feat Kori can't do? No, it doesn't. So much more goes into an investigator's rank than just strength. Investigators even say Amon with the right gear could be as strong as a special investigator. And fun fact, Amon after his death was promoted to a special investigator. so that argument is void. Now to explain why Amon is stronger than Kori, while Arata to Amon is equal to a first form centipede Kaneki, Kori is actually terrified of an out of control Heise. While Squad Zero was on a mission, Heise went beyond his Kagane usage limit and lost control. Kori was too terrified to act against this Heise to the point Arima had to step in. Ever since then, he deemed Heise to be dangerous and a threat. Now I don't want to dive into a deep rabbit hole explaining who's stronger between Part 1 Kaneki and Heise. So I will at the very least explain how there is a form of relativity between the two. Takizawa is a ghoul who is consistently compared to Part 1 Kaneki, at least before his later power-ups in RE. Heise, with Kaneki in control, then ties in a fight with Takizawa. And the Heise who Kori is scared of should be weaker than a Kaneki-controlled Heise. But to give him the benefit of the doubt, we can just say that the Heise he is scared of is one with Kaneki in control. Do you get what I'm saying? In this very low effort explanation, Kori is scared of a ghoul that is relative to the ghoul Amon tied with. You could try and argue that Kori being scared doesn't mean he is weaker because it's a part of his character, but Kori was only ever scared of two ghouls. Heise and Eto, two ghouls he is weaker than, so that doesn't work. Kotaro Amon is not very impressive in base when looking at a general scale, but due to his Arata 2 armor and modified Dojima, he's able to compete at a high rate SS level. Now, the investigator who begins our top 3 is Iwao Kuroiwa. Iwa is a simple character, not having much narrative impact alone, but through his contributions and connections to other characters does he have a presence. But in a fight, he can hold his own. 10 years before the beginning of Tokyo Ghoul, Iwa was a 29-year-old senior investigator engaged in a fight with the One-Eyed Owl. Iwa was able to block a barrage of hits from the ghoul, but it landed a massive blow on his shoulder. Iwa responded by cutting off the ghoul's arm, severely injuring its Kakuho. Their fight ended as a draw. Now this owl may look familiar, but it's not actually who you think. This isn't Kuzin, but actually his daughter Eito. She was 14 years old and leading an attack on the CCG. And although she was clearly smaller and weaker, she was still a rate SS ghoul. And well, she wasn't at her full power at the time, as she was overconfident and fatigued. She just got done fighting a special investigator, Mikito Urie, with the support of a bunch of other investigators. Proof of this is when looking back on the fight and thinking Mikito, she says, "We need to increase our numbers." But to Iwa's credit, after her loss to him, she decided to grow stronger. Iwa, similar to Amon, is a special investigator known for his physical strength. In fact, it's even implied Iwa can kill a ghoul with his bare hands. Iwa has consistently shown that he's impressive even without his Quinke, blocking Shikorei's Kagane with his prosthetic arm. Iwa actually bullies Shikorei without ever using his Quinke. Iwa, while wielding a normal sword, which, by the way, can't pierce ghoul's skin, lands multiple attacks on the ghoul, cutting his eyes and smacking him in the face like a baseball bat. Iwa's swings had so much force that it actually bruised Shikorei's face, and after the ghoul catches him off guard, removing Iwa's prosthetic hand and sword, Roma picks up the weapon trying to follow up on the attack, but Iwa dodges base Roma and judo throws her with one hand, then proceeds to choke out Shikorei. Shikorei and Roma don't really seem all that impressive, but that's their clown-like personality. In fact, Roma and Shikorei are actually rate SS ghouls. Roma, though, is the one that is really impressive. Secretly, she is the founder and leader of the clowns, and with her Kakuja, she is a rate SS ghoul known as Mother of Uran. And when faced with this monstrosity, Iwa with one hand raises his incapable sword. Iwa continues fighting the ghouls, even dropping Shikorei with a single knee, and while fatigued, is able to react and dodge an attack from a rate SS ghoul, and because of Iwa's impressive strength, is able to endure a punch from Uran Roma, but in the end, he got overwhelmed and actually lost his arm to her. Although Iwa has shown very impressive feats, his true scaling really comes from his relativity with the investigator that's right above him, and that is the number 2 on this list, Yukinori Shinohara. Iwa and Shinohara on 2 different occasions have been assigned as the main force against Kuzin. In their first fight during the 11th Ward operation, it was said if they can't take down Kuzin, nobody involved could, and during this fight they showcased their Arata armor, their Gokaku prototypes. With this armor, they are able to endure Kagane blasts from a holding back Kuzin, and thanks to the protection, they are able to offensively keep up with him. And due to Take's opening, they both land an attack on Kuzin, but ultimately they lack the firepower to do any real damage. And when faced with a threat that they can't overcome, they both choose to push themselves farther, activating their prototypes, feeding the armor with their own body to become stronger. They now have the ability to fully pressure Kuzin, moving faster and stronger than before. They then land a massive duo attack on the owl. Take even believes that they have the firepower to take down Kuzin. but it's all up to if Shinohara and Iwa can endure the armor. But they are prototypes, which typically mean test models, and here we see this as the prototypes begin to malfunction, eating Shinohara alive. And as Kouzen begins to leave, Shinohara says to himself that they are the ones who are truly getting away. In the aftermath of their fight, we learn that the Arata-powered investigators actually dealt real damage to Kouzen. And in the second light novel, we learn that Kouzen was heavily injured and needed weeks to recover from the damage. But that was only their first fight. The duo met the owl again. During the owl suppression operation, Kouzen no longer was holding back, taking out a large group of investigators. And as Kouzen is going on this tear, the duo announces their presence off guarding him, landing an attack. With the help of Hoji, all three are the main force against the one-eyed owl, and we get a better look at their gear. Iwa, a special investigator, wields a Rinkaku Raid-S Quinke named Koro Iwa Special, and wears a Kokaku Arata. His Quinke ultimately isn't that powerful. It appears to be a large shielded blade without any special techniques. And Shinohara, a special investigator, wields a Raid-S Bikaku Quinke named Oni Yamada Ichi, and wears a Kokaku Arata. Similar to Iwa, his Quinke doesn't have any special abilities, but it is a standard sword-shaped weapon. But with these Quinkes in armor, they are able to keep up with a bloodlusted Kouzen. Although they do have Hoji's help, they are the ones actively engaging with him. But similar to before, they lack the firepower to take out Kouzen, even with the help of Hoji. But to be fair, Shinohara and Iwa never activate their armor in the second fight. Could be out of fear of not wanting to get eaten alive. And after jumping him in a 5v1 after backup arrives, they take him down, with Iwa and Shinohara contributing real damage to the fight. Now you might be asking, how is Shinohara stronger than Iwa if they are both consistently portrayed to be extremely relative to one another? Well, that's because Shinohara actually performs better than Iwa. In their first fight with Kouzen, Iwa was getting tossed around and lit up, while Shinohara was having one-on-one altercations with the Ghoul, dodging and reacting to each other's attacks. Shinohara ends up landing an attack on Kouzen. Although it did no real damage, it was still something Iwa wasn't capable of. In their second fight, Iwa even gets his Quinke broken and hand cut off by a fatigued and one-armed Kouzen, while Shinohara survived the fight unscathed. If you want to use the anime, Shinohara is the one who dealt the final blow to Kouzen, not Hoji. You can try and argue that this is an older and out-of-prime Iwa, but there's literally no evidence to support that. Iwa is an active investigator. If he wasn't physically fit to fight, he would not be in the field of duty. It's also stated multiple times without the Arata, and if they were to use gear from 10 years ago, they wouldn't survive the fight. And to top all of that off, after powering up their prototypes, Shinohara and Iwa's movements were stated by investigators to be almost not human, something that wasn't said when Iwa fought Eito. So that's how you scale Iwa, directly to Shinohara, but now we have to figure out how Shinohara is scaled. Well, in the anime, there's a fight that never actually happens in the manga. Shinohara takes on a Raid-S Ayato, and with a resisting Arata armor, Shinohara kinda just dogs him. It wasn't really close, and honestly the fight isn't impressive as this Ayato is really weak, but I thought it would be cool to mention. But how we really scale Shinohara is through his fight with Centipede Kaneki. Kaneki, when engaged in a fight with failed Rise test subjects, takes them all out and begins to cannibalize to grow stronger. Shinohara happens to come across this Kaneki where we are introduced to his half Kakuja form, or what most people call it, Centipede Kaneki. Shinohara is able to block and push off Kaneki's attacks. He even states without his Arata, his spine would have snapped due to the force. So in response to coming face to face with such a powerful Ghoul, he shows off his Arata armor, Arata B0.8, which is a prototype in further development. And here he shows why he's called the Indomitable Shinohara. His strength comes from his tenacity, and using his experience from prior achievements, wielding the Quinkes from his former enemies, he is able to take down Ghouls. Shinohara blocks multiple barrages from Kaneki and even lands a massive hit, cutting off Kaneki's Kagane and dealing major damage to him. And after screaming in pain, Kaneki heals and pulls out even more Kagane, showing us his second centipede form. Shinohara, already wounded from their fight, continues to defend himself, even able to block this second form centipede Kaneki's attack and overpower him, pushing him off. But as Kaneki grew stronger, he got even faster. Too fast for Shinohara, to the point he even says he can't afford to even blink. Kaneki then lands a massive attack, finishing the fight. We later learn that Kaneki didn't actually puncture through this Arata, but was able to slip his Kagane through the cracks of the armor, and knocked Shinohara out from the impact. Now to explain why Shinohara is stronger than Amon, Amon with his Arata 2 armor was able to tie with a centipede Kaneki in a fight. So, seeing Shinohara lose, you would think that Amon should be stronger, but that's not the case. Yes, Amon tied with Kaneki, but it was in his first centipede form, which only uses 2 distinct Kagane. Shinohara actually beat the first form centipede Kaneki and forced him to develop even more Kagane, forcing him to become stronger. And not only do they show him becoming faster by having him flash step everywhere, which wasn't something he was doing prior, but it's actually stated that Kagenes boost a ghoul's physical stats, and when a Kakuho releases more Kagane, that is even more of a stat boost. So Shinohara beat the same Centipede Kaneki that Amon tied with, and even was able to react, block, and overpower a second form Centipede Kaneki. In fact, this is Kaneki's peak in part 1. You could argue that Amon did more damage preventing Kaneki from healing, which is true. He did do this and actually does have a higher damage output than the Shinohara that fought Kaneki, but he never activated his errata against Kaneki. With the fear of getting eaten alive like he almost did with his prototype, Shinohara never used its full power, and Kaneki, due to being a Renkaku half Kakuja, actually was the worst matchup for his errata armor because of his Kagene's powerful focused attacks. He couldn't solely rely on it for defense like he did with Kuzan. What I'm saying is Shinohara wasn't at his full power when fighting Kaneki. If he did activate his errata, he would have done similar damage to him, as he was able to contribute major damage to a full Kakuja and put him in a critical state needing weeks to recover. A full Kakuja benefits from armor unlike a half Kakuja, so Kuzan has higher durability than part 1 Kaneki. Yes, Amon has more damage output due to him being able to draw out the armor's full power, but he still matched a first form Centipede Kaneki in strength and speed. Due to Shinohara's fighting ability and tenacity, he was able to overcome this disadvantage. Add the strength and speed boost from errata on top of that, he should have no problem beating Amon. And if you're thinking that Shinohara's armor would eat him alive, causing him to lose to Amon, it's incorrect. He only used a prototype when fighting Kuzan the first time. During the Owl Suppression operation, he is using a completed errata. It doesn't have that weakness, it's just a PTSD thing for him. So Shinohara is stronger than Amon, and since Iwao scales to Shinohara, this also puts him above Amon. Shinohara and Iwao aren't flashy investigators, but they get the job done. They have consistently shown to be able to keep up with some of the strongest ghouls in the series. So how you choose to scale them on a general scale is up to you. If you believe them at their full power still can't beat part 1 Kaneki at his peak, I'd say high rate SS is where they are at. But if you think their feats displayed against Eto, Kuzan, and Aroma are enough to prove their full power should be no joke, it could be rate SS level investigators. But regardless, they are still weaker than the strongest human. Now, the end of the list and the number 1 strongest human in Tokyo Ghoul, to no one's surprise, is the problem child Juzo Suzuya. There's a common occurrence in this series, some of the craziest characters also happen to be some of the strongest. Typically this trend is found in the Ghoul side of the cast, but Juzo has a lot of experience in that environment. Formerly known as Rei, he was a child who was taken in by a Rei SS Ghoul known as the Big Madam. This Ghoul raised Rei in the Ghoul restaurant environment. Rei was a human pet. Big Madam wanted him to become a scrapper, a role given to humans in the Ghoul restaurant. Their purpose is to entertain and quote-unquote prepare food for these ghouls. But Rei needed training, so that's what was given to him. Ghouls would throw knives at him for not only their enjoyment, but to improve Rei's physical abilities. Eventually, he became a prized pet, and his reward for not only surviving the night but entertaining these ghouls was torture. And after repeated acts of these horrible actions, Rei's sense of pain became dulled, no longer having the ability to feel hurt of any physical kind. Eventually, Rei became a scrapper and was given a new name, now known as Juzo. He was Big Madam's prized scrapper, where he showed off his agility and skills with the tools that were used to hurt and train him. One day, the CCG raided the restaurant and Rei was taken into custody, where he was praised for his excellent physical talents, and because of this, he was granted the opportunity to become a CCG Ghoul investigator, trained under the special investigator named Yukinori Shinohara. Given a new family registry, Rei chose the name Juzo Suzuya, and he began his career as one of the best investigators to ever be part of the CCG. And due to this Ghoul circus-like training, Juzo is insanely talented in knife combat, even being stated by Heise to be a master with knives. Renji even states that no Dove is more skilled than Juzo in knife combat. Juzo has shown his skills with knives multiple times throughout this series. His first Quinke was a Bikaku knife known as Scorpion. Juzo was sent to take part in the 11th Ward operation, but he had no interest in taking part in it. Instead, he was looking for a real Quinke, but all he had was this small knife. Groups of ghouls stood in his way during his search, but they couldn't stop him. Juzo, on the lookout for a certain ghoul, suddenly stumbles upon him. Aigiri's raid-ass Jason. Jason was on the verge of death after being beaten up by Kaneki, even having one of his Kakuho eaten by him. But this weakened Jason still can put up a fight. Releasing his 2 Kagane, he tried to take out Juzo, but Juzo isn't someone to take lightly. Even when using a single scorpion knife, he takes out this weakened Jason with no issue. In the end, Juzo walked out of this operation with a new Quinque. After some time, his Quinque was ready to be given to Juzo, a Renkaku Quinque with a monetary RC value of 5,000. For reference, Heisei was measured to have an RC value of 2,753, and after its reveal, his Quinque resembles a scythe. In multiple different forms of media, the Grim Reaper is shown to wield a scythe, the weapon given to Juzo, the future CCG's Reaper. Juzo, during the raid in Kano's lab, stumbles across former academy classmates of his, but these former classmates are no longer human, but now half ghouls. Juzo, in response to this discovery, pulls out his Quinque Jason. Juzo is easily dodging both of their Kagane attacks, even clowning on the two during their fight. But a weird encounter happens off screen where Juzo gets cut and his Quinque Jason gets knocked away. The twin ghouls try to capitalize and attack Juzo, but he blitzes them, stabbing one of them in the eye with a scorpion knife. Juzo, not wanting to give the ghoul the opportunity to heal, follows up on the attack, unveiling that he not only has one scorpion knife, but in fact stole the whole set, all 56 of the Bikaku scorpion knives. He lands a barrage of attacks, showcasing his insane knife skills, and completely destroys the twin. After leaving her severely injured, he decides to spare her life, and instead chooses to go after what she holds precious. As he says this, her twin sister comes in to attack. Juzo, expecting this, grabs his prize, Jason, and one-taps the ghoul, and has the opportunity to finish them both off, but the one survivor retreats in hopes of saving her sister. But this isn't the end of Juzo showing off his Quinque during this arc. Later, after Centipede Kaneki defeats Shinohara, Amon comes into contact with this ghoul. He fights Kaneki, but is struggling to engage and converse with him, but Juzo shows up, landing a couple of knife throws and saving Amon. After insulting the group of investigators for just watching, he joins in on the fight, attacking Kaneki, but he evades both attacks, where Juzo then shows off his Quinque's ability, something that was never shown in the anime or ever again in the manga. Juzo's Jason has the ability to release a Kagane and attack its target, which is what he does to Kaneki, landing the attack, hurting Kaneki to the point he can't heal fast enough. In the end, Amon and Juzo won the fight, and Juzo even tried to kill Kaneki. If it wasn't for Amon's interference, this series would have ended there. If I'm being honest with you, Juzo has always been the strongest human in the series, ever since part 1. During the Owl Suppression operation, a group of CCG's elite human investigators were assigned to be part of the main force to take down Kousuke. After receiving word that they lacked firepower, they send in Juzo along with the Broken Reaper, Kori Ui. Juzo announces his presence in a Juzo-like fashion, efficiently off-guarding the One-Eyed Owl. During their fight, Juzo actually outperforms every single investigator involved, taking on a bloodlusted Rate Triple S ghoul Kousuke one-on-one, landing multiple attacks on the ghoul. And this is where the comparisons between Juzo and Arima begin. Hoji, after sitting in the back like he did the entire fight, comments that the more he watches Juzo, the more he reminds him of the young Arima, except the difference between the two is Juzo lacks the physical strength to take out the ghoul alone. Shinohara even comments that Juzo isn't very good at working in a team because he has only been taking ghouls out all on his own, and says Juzo can't do this alone, but needs to multiply his skills with everyone else involved. And if you want to use the anime, Mado, who is praised for his techniques and skills with a Quinque, actually shuts this down and puts the blame on Shinohara, saying the leader needs to know how to work with others around him. This is a fight, not a choreographed dance. The two then take on a ghoul in a 2v1 and impress the other investigators. But back to the manga, after wearing down Kousuke in a 5v1, Juzo approaches the ghoul again alone. They clash with one another, but Juzo jumps over the ghoul and cuts off his arm, dealing the most damage as he severely injures Kuzen's Kakuo. But this was more of a trade, as Juzo severely injured Kuzen took Juzo's leg, but due to his dulled senses, he doesn't even feel it. Juzo, with one leg, just sits aside and watches the others clean up and finish the ghoul. But Eito arrives. She viciously harms Shinohara, his mentor, and this is where Juzo begins to feel for others. Juzo, in a desperate attempt to defend his mentor, throws some scorpion knives at Eito. Although not doing any real damage, they still do pierce the Kakuja, and this one-legged Juzo decides to take a stand and fight back. Throwing another barrage, he pierces her Kakuja again, even being able to draw blood. This might not seem that impressive, but for comparison, Kori's attacks using Tarui literally bounced off of her, and while using Hoji's Rate Double S Quinque, still couldn't draw blood, but a one-legged Juzo did with just his scorpion knives. After part 1 of Tokyo Ghoul, Juzo has shown to be extremely talented, but he had 3 glaring weaknesses. One was he had a missing leg, the other was he couldn't work well in a team, and the last was his lack of physical strength to do damage to Kakujas. But in RE, Juzo was looking to change that. In the build up to the auction operation, Juzo was assigned the role of infiltration. The problem is he wouldn't be able to sneak his Quinque into the auction, so he would be at a disadvantage. This doesn't bother Juzo at all, and we come to see why. When faced with these large amounts of ghouls, Juzo decides to show off his first attempt at fixing his weaknesses, unveiling his prosthetic leg, which is able to store his 56 scorpion knives. Juzo goes on a tear, taking out everyone in his path, announcing the beginning of the operation. But he comes across the Raid SS Black Rabbit. They have their altercation. Juzo is able to dodge every Ayato Kagane attack while he is dodging all of Juzo's knife throws. They are fighting on equal grounds for now, but Juzo says during their fight that his chances of winning are slim, and without Jason, he might not win. They continue to fight, but it ends in Juzo's retreat. This is used to try and downscale him for some reason. Juzo wasn't even using his strongest Quinke, but his limited stock of knives, and he was using these in a battle against an Ukaku Ghoul like Ayato. Ukaku Ghouls are known for their long-range attacks, while Juzo is stuck with a close-range weapon. Juzo literally brought a knife to a gunfight. And even then, Ayato was still unable to hit Juzo, and he even vanished out of Ayato's sight. And you know what Ayato says after Juzo retreats? Where is he? When he was just looking directly at him. And instead of saying Juzo retreated because Ayato was stronger, he himself even asked if Juzo is out of ammo. Then says leaving Jason behind backfired on him. This doesn't make any sense to me to try and downscale Juzo because of this. In fact, it should upscale him since Juzo was faster and able to evade Ayato's sight. After retreating, Juzo says, I have my promise to Heise, which was to keep Toru safe. The investigator Juzo infiltrated with? Why would he waste time in a fight he already has a disadvantage in because of his available equipment? Later in the auction, Juzo shows that he was able to fix his second weakness. The problem child of the CCG reformed after seeing his mentor injured in the fight against the One-Eyed Owl, and the spectacle of the young brave hero going forth attracted notice and many followers. This is what created the Suzuya squad, and Juzo was able to raise the investigators so much that they were even able to be called an expanded Squad Zero, rivaling Arima's own squad. And after Big Madam completely destroys Urie and Toru, the Suzuya squad steps in to save them, and they smoothly and effortlessly track down the ghoul, showing off their teamwork. Juzo himself, the investigator who once before couldn't handle working in a team, is able to contribute in team combination attacks. And as Juzo stands facing the ghoul who raised him, watching his new family take out the Raid SS ghoul, which just leaves one last weakness for Juzo to counter. The Suzuya squad was assigned to be a part of the Roshima operation. And as they make landfall, the Suzuya squad goes on a tear, showcasing their superiority over every other squad, being stated to move too fast for the other teams, such as Kori and Hoji's squads. But the Suzuya squad was given clearance to do their thing. As they proceed, Juzo is still training his men, similar to how Arima trained Take during their fight with Renji and Uta. Misa retreats from the Suzuya squad, where she then specifies that Juzo is a beast, and the beach was nothing but a one-sided slaughter. Even though she witnessed every investigator fight on the beach, she was impressed by Juzo himself. Later, Juzo's right-hand man Abara comes face to face with the ghoul Juzo fought before, and after being completely bullied by Corona, she begins to insult Juzo and his leadership, when Abara reveals that Juzo would never abandon his men. Juzo attempts to off-guard Corona, but she dodges. He then follows up with a throw of knives. Corona compliments Juzo's speed and aim and says she can't dodge them, getting tagged by all three. And when having another reunion with a former academy classmate, they choose to have their rematch. She dodges multiple attacks from Juzo, but as she falls, his team jumps in, attacking her as well, revealing that it's not like before when Juzo was alone. Corona then reveals she is stronger than before, playing out her half Kakuja form, resembling a spider. Juzo then prepares his men for an eradication of a Raid SS ghoul. Spider Corona attacks the group, but they all defend themselves. As the fight continues, the Suzuya squad is pressuring her, landing multiple attacks and setting up Juzo for the finish, but he gets caught. Spider Corona with her Kagane breaks through Jason and stabs Juzo. And in the same exact chapter, chapter 81, Arima loses to Kaneki, symbolizing their connection as the Reaper. Now again, people try to use this to downscale Juzo, but Corona isn't weak at all. She's a Raid SS ghoul who is able to tag and even hold back an attack from Iwao Amon, the same ghoul who blocked One-Eyed King Kaneki's attack, and Kaneki couldn't puncture Amon's Kakuja. But back to the fight, Corona is gloating over the death of Juzo, but the Suzuya squad doesn't slow down a bit, continuing the pressure against the Raid SS ghoul, landing a massive attack. Corona, confused on how they can act like nothing just happened, begins to laugh at the idea that Juzo doesn't matter, but this instead makes the Suzuya squad laugh because Juzo isn't dead. With one attack, he slices Corona in half. Juzo then reveals his solution to the problem of his lack of physical strength, his new Kokaku Arata Joker armor. Juzo is already known for his speed, but now with his Joker armor he is even faster, completely perception blitzing Corona, landing multiple vicious attacks, and forcing her to retreat. Now Juzo's Joker is not your ordinary Arata armor. It actually likes to focus on Juzo's skilled knife combat, having knives for hands and tendril-like blades on the back, and due to his dulled sense of pain, Juzo is able to push his Joker armor farther than most Arata users. And similar to how his loss was connected to Arima, his showcase of his full power is also a connection as well. The chapter before in RE chapter 86, Ken Kaneki accepted the role and succeeded Arima as the One-Eyed King. And here, one chapter later, is Juzo with his Joker armor, succeeding Arima as the new CCG's Reaper. Now, it might seem like I've just been on a long tangent for Juzo, but trust me, I'm building up to something. I just want to explain all of Juzo's gear and abilities before I really explain how strong he is, because a lot of people who have read or watched Tokyo Ghoul seem to not understand or accept his true level of strength. I mean, there's multiple statements proving he's the strongest human. Before the clown invasion, Juzo was selected to become the CCG's new Reaper, but I like the title of the Stitched Reaper more. Juzo then takes over Arima's former position as S3 squad leader. Dr. Shiba, when speaking of elite investigators who go on to become special investigators, always fight a Kakuja at some point in time. And Juzo was directly mentioned along with Arima and Kori, 3 investigators who have a place in the Reaper conversation. During the conflict of a war between the Ghoul group Go and the CCG, she was asked if they could win. His answer was in an all-out battle, he says they don't stand a chance, and directly mentions Juzo as a reason why. I mean, it's quite literally stated to be just like Arima and have abilities that seemed out of this world. It's obvious Juzo is the strongest human. I could have gotten this section done fast and end the video, but that's not good enough for me. I want to truly explain how strong this character is. So here is how you scale Juzo Suzuya, the CCG's Stitched Reaper. Juzo was assigned to lead his S3 squad into the battle on the raid on the Goat's hideout. Eventually, near the end of the operation, Ken Kaneki appears. Both sides understand that this is a critical fight and the outcome will decide the rest of the series, and when faced with a powerful opposition, both sides power up. Ken Kaneki pulls out his centipede form while Juzo pulls out his Joker Arata. And in the battle between the successor of the One-Eyed King and the successor of the CCG's Reaper, Juzo Suzuya is the winner. Now obviously this fight comes with a lot of scrutiny, and I'm going to try and address every point regarding the fight. Point 1, pre-fight encounter. Some have tried to argue that Kaneki should be way stronger, as we see before their fight when Juzo and Kaneki get into an altercation. Kaneki with his Kagane is able to block and dodge all of Juzo's attacks. This is just a dumb and dishonest argument, as we literally see Juzo clash with Kaneki, then dodge his Kagane attack. This portrays relativity with one another, not superiority for one side. And even if it did, it doesn't matter. Character A could have a stronger base than character B, but B has a stronger transformation than A. Point 2. Kaneki is holding back while Juzo is going for the kill. This is a common misinterpretation, and a big reason for that is due to Kaneki's no-kill policy. Originally, the plan was to not kill humans. This was indeed Kaneki's wish, but during the Goat raid, nobody follows this rule. Hinami and Toka kill countless members of Suzuya's squad, and on top of that, Kaneki in his own imagination says to Juzo, "I won't hold back." So Kaneki is not holding back, but Juzo was. People look to the statement that Juzo says right before fighting him, which says, "Heise, I gotta tell you, I'm just gonna kill you." This can be easily interpreted as Juzo just trying to psych himself up for the fight, because it was Harada's direct order to stop and not kill Kaneki. The Ogai themselves say this. Then on top of that, Juzo, when speaking of the dragon, says, "Maybe I should have killed it," then begins thinking of Heise. Juzo was holding back. Point 3. Juzo thought he was going to die against a weakened Kaneki. This should be quite obviis, but no, he didn't. Juzo is clearly not aware of Kaneki's condition. He was speaking of the ghoul that killed Arima, not Kaneki. This isn't a comparison of strength between Juzo and Kaneki. Juzo has never seen One-Eyed King Kaneki fight, nor know of his condition. Juzo was merely comparing himself to the ghoul that killed Arima. This should be quite clear when right after the Coach Leia outbreak, Juzo says Heise might be pretty strong. How would he know that when he wasn't there to see the fight? It's clearly a comparison between himself and Arima, which leads me to my next point. Point 4. Kaneki was weakened while Juzo was at his full power. Yes, Kaneki was in a weakened state, but he still had enough power to draw out his centipede form. It's like people just don't remember the Shu arc at all. When Kaneki and Toka were face to face with Shu, he explained that if you don't provide fuel for your Kagane, it will stop working. Toka says herself, yes, this is true. She hasn't been eating properly, so she can't pull out her Kagane. That's why Toka bit Kaneki in the first place. Although Kaneki was in a weakened state, he still could draw out his strongest form. And on top of that, Kaneki was love amped. For those that don't know, specifically ghouls, when determined to protect something they love, receive an amp in power. Kaneki, right before fighting Juzo, is saying to himself he is glad to be able to protect everyone he cares about. And believe it or not, but Juzo is nowhere near his full power in this fight. I don't know how one could come to this conclusion. Juzo was mentally nerfed, quite terribly to be honest. Every investigator at this point in time was, as he begins to distrust the leader of the CCG, his boss that he answers directly to. Juzo then begins to question if what he is doing is even what he wants, saying he doesn't want ghouls gone, but only for things to stay the same. Uriye even says every investigator has lost sight of why we started fighting in the first place, as they are still upset over being tricked into killing humans during the con raids, something Juzo did a lot of, and then says he doesn't like the feeling of, as it reminds him of being a scrapper. And the only reason Juzo is even able to go on after all of this is his hope for Shinohara to recover. Nakarai, a member of the Suzuya squad, says without that, what would he fight for? Juzo didn't even want to take part in the goat sweep operation, but Furata manipulated him into joining, threatening to cut funding for Shinohara's treatment if Juzo doesn't help. And during the operation, all Juzo is thinking about is Shinohara. Standing in a field of flowers, he thinks back about how he found flowers in Shinohara's hospital room. Even after the fight, all Juzo is thinking about is his mentor. And to top all of that off, Juzo didn't want to fight Kaneki. When asked after Kaneki became the one-eyed king if he could beat him in a fight, instead of saying yes or no to a yes or no question, Juzo answers by saying, Aize is my friend and does nothing but compliment him, but then says, I will take Shinohara's place. And we know he isn't happy taking the role of Shinohara, as when the ghouls come to the CCG wanting to work together, Juzo in response says, we need to settle this alone. It's what Shinohara would have done. But he is clearly upset, looking down and frowning. He only begins to smile when he is told to make his own decisions, and he chooses to work with the ghouls. Juzo didn't want to fight Kaneki at all. He didn't even want to be involved in the operation. And Juzo was fatigued and injured coming into this fight. Abara tells Juzo to not push himself so hard, and that he sustained some injuries. You might respond with, well, Juzo doesn't feel pain, so it doesn't matter. But the pain still exists. Abara says this himself. Juzo doesn't feel pain due to his dulled senses, but his body still takes damage. Why did Juzo fall over and pass out when fighting Eito if he doesn't feel pain? Because his body still receives it. It's not a boost to durability, but a boost to endurance. Big difference. And now the final point. Point 5. It was a 2-on-1 fight. This is the most go-to response, and what really causes this is the statement from Furata, where he says, one wrong move and Kaneki would have won. Looking at this, you would think, oh, if it was a 1-on-1, Kaneki would win, but there's more to it. Now, I already explained why I think Abara's contributions to this fight are overrated, but now I'm going to give you even more evidence as to why that is so. In Kaneki's imagination, even though it was a quote-unquote 2-on-1, Kaneki sees it as a 1-on-1 in this tournament setting he created, and he even doubts if he could beat Joker Juzo with his Kagane, and calls Juzo the undefeated ultimate investigator. Then he questions what he was supposed to do to avoid this defeat, and instead of choosing a different approach to the fight, you know what his first offered solution was? To kill Juzo when he was trying to grab candy all the way back in chapter 11 of RE. One could bring up the Abara statement, but literally before coming to that idea of Abara, he blames saving Hinami for the reason he lost. What's even funnier is after bringing up Abara, he questions if he could have even beaten Juzo alone, saying the moment Juzo threw himself at me, it was the decisive blow. That means Juzo did this himself, and he walked out of the fight relatively fine, no critical injuries, and his armor is intact. I mean, Kaneki says himself that Juzo stopped him. If we decide to use the anime, Juzo is literally fighting Kaneki 1-on-1 without Jason, but only his hands and Joker abilities, where they fight on even ground. And the best part of all of this is Kaneki says despite his weakened state, the king version of me is the strongest, making him stronger than Eye Patch Kaneki, Part 1 Centipede Kaneki, Black Reaper Kaneki, and even the Kaneki that beat Arima. And Juzo beat him, which means Juzo outscales all of these other Kanekis and their feats. Now, I'm not saying a full-powered Juzo is beating a full-power one-eyed King Kaneki, and I'm not saying he would lose either. I'm saying that they are relative. People use the Furata statement, but it doesn't hurt my case. It actually solidifies it, showing that they are extremely relative to one another, which means Juzo outscales every character that Kaneki did at the time. You might still doubt this, but Juzo goes on to show insane feats when he is at his weakest physical state in RE. Juzo, after just fighting Kaneki, is fighting gravity, and with one hand holding Jason, is able to fight off the dragon. You know, the strongest creature in the series, said to have been able to beat Eito and Arima in a single punch. The creature described to be the final boss. Juzo during the final fight is still wearing bandages and is able to cut off Ito's Kakuja head without his Joker armor. I know I questioned the strength of the owl, but Juzo was still confident in taking the Ghoul out, never even thinking of activating his Joker armor. She would have been done if she wasn't a walking corpse immune to pain. Ghouls are even surprised she can still fight. Juzo then is able to block her large-scale attack. He then activates his Joker armor and shields Kori from Ito's RC blast where the armor is able to endure it. But what really proves his strength is his fight with Ghoul Kaiko in the final battle. Now I know I questioned his strength as well, but that was a half-human Kaiko. This is a Ghoul Kaiko who is wielding the highest rated Quinke in the series, the Rate Triple S Owl Quinke that Arima used against Kaneki. And with one swing of it, Kori thought it was Ito on the move again. And just to jog your memory, Kaiko claimed to be stronger than Arima and said he trained him. And for context, this Kaiko went on to solo the Suzuya squad, the Q squad, plus Yusa Arima, and Renji, Shu, and Nishio in a 3v1. But Joker Juzo, who was still injured and fatigued and never got a chance to fully recover, was the only one to put Kaiko on the defensive. And the only reason he lost was because of his Joker armor being damaged from Ito's RC blast. Juzo's movements were so fast and too much for the armor, it broke apart on him. Juzo is a character whose strength is severely downplayed. It's crazy. I see people say Juzo would lose to characters like Ito, Kuzen, even Takizawa. Some even go as far to say he would lose to Shachi Noro. This is just plain wrong. Juzo is a character that is among some of the top tiers in the verse. To say he loses to these characters when he's relative to a one-eyed King Kaneki and fought off the dragon is crazy. Even putting Juzo on a Rate Triple S level is just wrong. You wouldn't say Arima is on the level of Eito, Kuzen, and Roma, would you? So why with Juzo? Juzo is an investigator who's beyond Rate Triple S and just below the dragon tier of power. But without a doubt, Juzo Suzuya is the strongest human in Tokyo Ghoul.